Have you ever wondered why the most profound scientific discoveries often feel like remembering something you already knew? When Walter Russell emerged from his 39-day cosmic illumination in 1921, he didn't describe learning new information. He spoke of recognition, of awakening to truths that consciousness itself had always known but temporarily forgotten. The greatest deception ever perpetrated on humanity is not political manipulation or religious dogma. It's the perceptual illusion that matter exists as something separate from consciousness. This belief shapes every aspect of our experience, yet it may be the most profound misunderstanding we carry about the nature of reality. Right now, reach out and touch the surface nearest to you. Feel its apparent solidity, its weight, its resistance to your hand. This experience seems so undeniably real, so obviously material, that questioning it feels like denying the evidence of your senses. Yet what you're experiencing as solid matter is actually compressed light, awareness appearing to itself as density, consciousness playing the most convincing game of limitation ever conceived. Think about this carefully. When you see a tree, what are you actually perceiving? Light waves striking your retina, interpreted by your brain, appearing within consciousness as the experience we call seeing a tree. The tree, your eyes, your brain, and your awareness of seeing all are modifications of the same light, the same consciousness, appearing as apparent diversity while remaining essentially one substance. Walter Russell discovered what quantum physics is only beginning to glimpse. There is no matter in the sense we've been taught to believe. What we experience as solid, permanent, separate objects are actually waves of light, consciousness itself, compressed into temporary patterns by the power of focused awareness. Every atom in your body, every molecule in the chair you sit on, every star blazing in distant galaxies, all are waves of light appearing as form, consciousness appearing as substance. This recognition isn't just philosophically interesting. It's the key to understanding your true creative power. If everything you perceive is consciousness appearing as form, then you are not a powerless observer of an external world. You are the very awareness from which all worlds arise, the light from which all forms emerge, the consciousness that dreams all dreams into apparent existence. The scientific establishment has built an entire worldview on the assumption that consciousness emerges from matter, that awareness is produced by brains, that mind is a byproduct of chemical reactions. But direct investigation reveals the exact opposite. All matter, all brains, all chemical reactions appear within consciousness. The container cannot be contained by what it contains. The screen cannot be projected by the movie that plays upon it. Consider the nature of your dreams. In a dream, you might encounter vast landscapes, complex characters, intricate storylines. The entire dream universe appears completely real and external to the dream character you take yourself to be. Yet upon waking, you recognize that the entire experience, including the dreamer, was appearing within your own consciousness. What if waking life operates on the same principle, but at a level so fundamental that we rarely question it? Modern physics has already cracked open this possibility. At the quantum level, particles exist in states of probability until observed, suggesting that consciousness plays a fundamental role in determining what appears as real. The famous double-slit experiment demonstrates that the act of observation affects the behavior of particles. As physicist John Wheeler noted, we live in a participatory universe where consciousness and reality are inextricably intertwined. But you don't need to understand quantum mechanics to verify this truth. Simply notice where you encounter everything you've ever experienced. In consciousness, every thought, emotion, sensation, perception, all appear within the same field of awareness that you are. There is no evidence, none whatsoever, of anything existing outside of consciousness. Even the idea of outside appears within awareness. This understanding dissolves the fundamental assumption of separation that underlies human suffering. If consciousness is the substance of all experience, then what you are is not separate from what you perceive. The observer and the observed, the knower and the known, the creator and the creation are revealed as one seamless reality. Light knowing itself as infinite forms while remaining essentially light. The moment you truly understand that matter is consciousness appearing as form, everything changes. You are no longer a separate being trying to manipulate an external world. You recognize yourself as the very awareness from which all worlds arise, not as belief or concept, but as immediate, undeniable recognition of what has always been true. This awakening recognition often comes in waves. Perhaps you're walking in nature, and suddenly the boundaries between you and the forest dissolve. Maybe you're looking into someone's eyes and recognize the same awareness looking back. Or it might arise during meditation when the sense of being a separate observer vanishes, leaving only pure knowing without a knower. Walter Russell's illumination lasted 39 days, but the recognition itself was instantaneous. The sudden knowing that he was not Walter Russell having a cosmic experience, but cosmic consciousness appearing as Walter Russell. The individual hadn't disappeared. Rather, it was revealed as a temporary focusing of infinite awareness, like sunlight concentrated through a magnifying glass while remaining essentially sunlight. This same recognition is available right now, not as a future attainment or spiritual achievement, but as the most obvious fact of your existence. The awareness reading these words, is it personal? Does it belong to a body? Does it have age, gender, nationality? Or is it the same universal awareness that moves the planets, grows the trees, beats every heart, and dreams every dream? Consider your experience right now. You're aware of these words, perhaps sounds in your environment, sensations in your body, thoughts arising and passing. Notice that all these experiences appear within the same field of awareness. This awareness itself, what does it look like? What color is it? Where is it located? How old is it? When you look for the awareness that knows all experience, what do you find? You might notice that awareness itself has no qualities you can grasp. It's not an object among objects, but the space in which all objects appear. It's not a thing you can point to, but the knowing presence that makes all pointing possible. It's not something you possess, but what you fundamentally are, the very capacity for experience itself. This recognition can be simultaneously the most obvious and most shocking realization possible. Obvious because awareness has never been absent from any moment of your life. Shocking because it completely overturns the story of being a separate individual struggling to survive in a hostile world. When you look at another person from this recognition, what are you actually seeing? Light waves interpreted by consciousness, appearing within consciousness as an experience of consciousness. But more profoundly, you're seeing yourself, the same awareness that you are, appearing as an apparently different form. There is no your awareness in their awareness. There is just awareness, appearing as the play of apparent multiplicity while remaining seamlessly one. This understanding begins to transform your relationship with everything. Other people become not separate entities to fear or manipulate, but consciousness recognizing itself in apparent disguise. Difficult situations become not external problems to solve, but consciousness exploring different aspects of its own infinite nature. Even your own thoughts and emotions are revealed not as personal possessions, but as consciousness knowing itself through the beautiful diversity of human experience. The implications ripple through every aspect of life. If you are consciousness itself appearing as a human being, then what you call your life is actually consciousness exploring what it's like to be human. Every experience, pleasant or painful, ordinary or extraordinary, becomes consciousness investigating its own infinite possibilities through the lens of apparent individuality. This doesn't mean you stop being human or caring about human concerns. Rather, it means you're human while knowing you're not exclusively human. You engage fully with the relative world while resting in the absolute truth of what you are. This is what Russell meant by the transformation from sensing man to knowing man. Not the acquisition of new abilities, but the recognition of what has always been present. Russell understood that the shift from sensing man to knowing man isn't about acquiring more sophisticated perception. It's about recognizing that perception itself is consciousness appearing as the relationship between knower and known. The sensing man believes he receives information from an external world. The knowing man recognizes that all information arises within his own being. This recognition reveals what Russell called the law of rhythmic, balanced interchange, the fundamental principle governing all creation. Consciousness explores itself through the dance of apparent opposites, expansion and contraction, manifestation and dissolution, electric expression and magnetic reception. Every experience has its complement. Every manifestation requires its rest. Every expression needs its reception. Russell discovered that electricity and magnetism aren't separate forces, but two aspects of one creative principle. Electricity is consciousness appearing as outward expression, expansion, manifestation, the creative impulse that brings form into apparent existence. Magnetism is consciousness appearing as inward drawing, contraction, dissolution, the receptive principle that allows forms to return to their source. Every phenomenon in existence results from these two forces working in perfect balance. Your own life demonstrates this principle continuously. When you focus attention outward, engaging with the world, creating projects, expressing yourself, you're engaging the electric aspect of consciousness. When you draw attention inward, resting, reflecting, meditating, you're engaging the magnetic aspect. Neither is better than the other. Both are necessary expressions of the creative cycle. Consider your breathing as a perfect example. The inhalation is electric, drawing life force into form. The exhalation is magnetic, releasing form back into space. The pause between breaths is the still point where both principles rest in perfect balance. Your heartbeat, the cycle of sleep and waking, the seasons, the tides, all demonstrate this fundamental rhythm of creation. The compression of light into matter isn't a mechanical process, but the creative play of consciousness with its own infinite potential. When you hold a sustained thought or intention, you're literally compressing the light of awareness into corresponding forms of experience. When you release attachment and return to open awareness, you're allowing those forms to decompress back into pure potential. This understanding completely transforms your relationship with both manifestation and surrender. Manifestation isn't about forcing external reality to conform to personal desires. It's about aligning your thinking with the natural creative principles of consciousness itself. You're not trying to manipulate a separate world, but recognizing your role as consciousness, focusing itself into specific experiences. Similarly, surrender isn't about giving up your power. It's about recognizing that your true power is the awareness from which all apparent powers arise. When you release the need to control outcomes, you allow consciousness to express through you with maximum creativity and minimum resistance. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every intention you hold is actively participating in this creative process. Not metaphorically, but literally. Consciousness doesn't just observe reality, it shapes reality through the very act of being aware. The quality of your attention, the focus of your mind, the resonance of your being all contribute to the forms that appear in your experience. This is why Russell emphasized the importance of balanced thinking. Thoughts held in harmony with natural law tend to manifest with ease and grace. Thoughts that violate the principle of rhythmic balanced interchange create imbalance, resistance, and eventual correction through what appears as external circumstance. The scientific community is beginning to validate these insights through research in quantum mechanics, consciousness studies, and systems theory. Studies show that focused intention can influence random number generators. The meditation changes brain structure, that observer expectation affects experimental outcomes. These findings suggest that consciousness and physical reality are far more intimately connected than classical science assumed. But you don't need scientific validation to explore these principles in your own life. You can begin noticing how your internal state correlates with your external experience. When you're in a state of appreciation and openness, do you notice more opportunities and positive interactions? When you're contracted in fear or resentment, does your world seem to reflect those qualities back to you? This isn't about magical thinking or denying the apparent solidity of physical law. It's about recognizing that physical law itself may be consciousness expressing through consistent patterns, and that by aligning with these patterns, you participate more harmoniously in the creative process. Understanding these principles intellectually is one thing. Embodying them experientially is quite another. The shift from sensing to knowing isn't achieved through effort, but through recognition. Not developing new abilities, but acknowledging the creative power you've always been exercising unconsciously. The most fundamental practice is learning to rest as awareness itself, rather than identifying exclusively with the contents of awareness. Right now, notice that you're aware of these words, but what is aware of being aware? Can you find the awareness that knows awareness? Or do you simply discover that awareness knows itself without needing an additional layer of observation? This isn't a meditation technique to master, but your natural state to recognize. Throughout your day, practice returning to the simple question, what is aware? Not as something to figure out mentally, but as an invitation to notice what's already present. When thoughts arise, ask what's aware of thinking. When emotions flow, notice what remains unchanged as they move. When physical sensations appear, recognize what knows the body without being limited to the body. Begin to experiment with conscious creation, starting with simple situations. Before entering any interaction, pause and notice. What quality of awareness am I bringing to this moment? Are you approaching with contraction or expansion, resistance or receptivity, fear or love? Notice how your internal state influences what appears in your experience, not as a rigid law, but as a natural correlation. Try this with everyday interactions. Before talking with someone, consciously align with appreciation and genuine interest in their well-being. Notice how this affects the quality of connection. Before approaching a task, align with curiosity and presence rather than anxiety about outcomes. Observe how this influences both your experience and your effectiveness. This isn't about controlling results through positive thinking. It's about recognizing your role as consciousness, participating in its own creative process. You're not trying to manipulate a separate reality, but aligning with the natural flow of awareness as it expresses through your particular perspective. Practice observing the rhythms in your own life. Notice your natural cycles of energy and rest, focus and diffusion, solitude and connection. Instead of fighting these rhythms with artificial schedules or social expectations, experiment with honoring them. Plan demanding activities during your natural energy peaks. Schedule reflection and integration during your quiet periods. When you encounter problems or challenges, try shifting from the question, how can I solve this? To how is consciousness exploring itself through this situation? This isn't spiritual bypassing, but a practical reframe that often reveals opportunities and perspectives invisible from the problem-focused mindset. Begin to notice how consciousness appears to limit itself in order to experience specific forms. Your personality, your talents, your challenges, these aren't accidents or punishments, but consciousness focusing itself in particular ways to explore different aspects of its own nature. This recognition brings both humility and empowerment. Humility because you're not special or separate. Empowerment because you're consciousness itself. Throughout your day, practice seeing ordinary activities as consciousness in action. When you brush your teeth, recognize it as consciousness caring for itself. When you listen to music, see it as consciousness delighting in its own creativity. When you help others, notice it as consciousness serving itself through apparent multiplicity. This practice doesn't require changing your behavior. It requires recognizing the sacred nature of behaviors you're already doing. The goal isn't to become more spiritual, but to recognize the spiritual nature of what you already are. When strong emotions arise, instead of immediately trying to change them, first practice recognizing what's aware of the emotion. Notice that the awareness of anger isn't itself angry. The awareness of sadness isn't itself sad. This awareness, what you truly are, remains peaceful and untroubled regardless of what appears within it. This doesn't mean becoming detached from human feeling, but discovering your true relationship to all experience. You can feel deeply while knowing that what you fundamentally are transcends all feeling. You can engage passionately with life while resting in the peace that passes understanding. Recognition of your true nature as consciousness itself is profound, but its real power emerges through integration into every aspect of daily life. True spiritual maturity isn't about achieving special states or having extraordinary experiences. It's about living ordinary life from the recognition of what you actually are. This integration happens naturally as the recognition deepens. When you know yourself as consciousness appearing as a human being, rather than a human being occasionally having conscious experiences, every moment becomes an opportunity for consciousness to express its infinite creativity through your particular form. Begin by noticing how this recognition affects your relationship with time. When you're identified exclusively with the personal story, time feels linear and limited. There's never enough time. You're always running behind or waiting for something better. But consciousness itself is timeless. It doesn't exist in time. Time exists within it. From this perspective, each moment is complete and perfect, containing infinite depth and possibility. This doesn't mean becoming passive about practical matters or abandoning planning and goals. Rather, it means engaging with temporal activities while resting in timeless presence. You can be fully committed to projects and relationships while knowing that your essential nature is never threatened by any outcome. Watch how this understanding transforms your relationship with other people. When you recognize others as consciousness appearing in different forms, competition gives way to collaboration, judgment transforms into curiosity, and fear of others dissolves into appreciation of diversity. This doesn't mean losing your discriminating wisdom or becoming naive about human psychology. It means seeing the consciousness behind all psychological patterns. In intimate relationships, this recognition can be revolutionary. Instead of relating from mutual need and fear, trying to get something from each other or protect yourself from being hurt, you begin to relate from wholeness to wholeness. Love becomes not something you exchange, but something you are, expressing itself through the beautiful play of a parent relationship. Notice how work and creative expression change when approached from this understanding. Instead of working to get something, money, recognition, security, you begin to work as consciousness expressing its creativity through your particular talents and interests. This doesn't mean becoming irresponsible about practical matters, but finding deeper motivation that sustains and inspires rather than depleting you. The integration naturally includes your relationship with your own thoughts and emotions. Instead of being the victim of your mental and emotional patterns, you recognize them as consciousness exploring different ways of knowing itself. This brings both compassion and freedom. Compassion because these patterns serve a purpose in consciousness's exploration. Freedom because you're no longer exclusively identified with them. Physical health and well-being often improve naturally through this integration. When you stop fighting your body as if it were separate from consciousness and begin caring for it as consciousness caring for itself, healing becomes a natural expression of wholeness rather than a struggle against illness. Money and material resources take on a different quality when approached from this recognition. Instead of hoarding or desperately seeking, you begin to allow resources to flow as consciousness providing for itself through the apparent multiplicity of forms. This doesn't mean being careless with practical matters, but discovering the difference between wise stewardship and anxiety-driven accumulation. Perhaps most significantly, the integration dissolves the seeking itself. When you recognize that what you've been seeking is what you already are, the compulsive search for completion in external circumstances naturally relaxes. This doesn't make you passive or disengaged. It allows you to act from fullness rather than lack, from love rather than need. The challenges and difficulties of human life don't disappear through this recognition, but they're revealed as consciousness exploring different aspects of its own nature. Pain becomes consciousness investigating sensitivity. Confusion becomes consciousness exploring not knowing. Loss becomes consciousness experiencing impermanence. Nothing is excluded from the divine play. This understanding naturally gives rise to what could be called effortless effort, action that arises spontaneously from wholeness rather than being forced by personal will. Decisions become clear, relationships become harmonious, and creative expression flows naturally when consciousness is no longer fighting against itself through the illusion of separation. We arrive at Russell's ultimate vision, the transformation of humanity from sensing beings trapped in separate bodies to knowing beings recognizing their shared identity as universal consciousness. This isn't a distant utopian dream, but a present possibility, available not through mass conversion, but through individual recognition, spreading naturally through the field of consciousness. Every person who awakens to their true nature as awareness itself contributes to the collective awakening, not by convincing others or teaching concepts, but simply by living from this recognition. Consciousness recognizing itself in one apparent form makes it easier for consciousness to recognize itself in other forms. This is why authentic awakening is always both deeply personal and inherently universal. The beauty of this process is that it requires no organization, no institution, no authority figure to manage or direct it. Consciousness awakening to itself is a completely natural phenomenon, like water flowing downhill or flowers turning toward the sun. It happens through resonance rather than persuasion, through presence rather than preaching. When you live from the recognition of your true nature, others sense something different about your presence, even if they can't articulate what it is. There's a quality of peace, authenticity, and freedom that consciousness naturally recognizes in itself. This recognition often awakens curiosity in others, not about concepts or beliefs, but about the source of this quality of being. This is why the most powerful teaching happens through presence rather than words. When consciousness recognizes itself clearly in one form, it creates what could be called a field of recognition that makes awakening more accessible to others. It's like one candle lighting another. The first candle loses nothing, but suddenly there's twice as much light. Share your insights and experiences, but not to prove anything or convince anyone. Share as consciousness celebrating its own recognition through your unique perspective. When someone asks about the peace they sense in you, point them toward their own awareness rather than toward any teaching or technique. Help them discover what they already are rather than trying to give them something they don't have. Connect with others who are exploring these recognitions. Whether through local gatherings, online communities, or simply honest conversations with friends and family, the sharing of recognition strengthens and clarifies the understanding for everyone involved. This isn't about forming spiritual clubs or exclusive groups, but about consciousness recognizing itself wherever it appears. Be patient with the collective process. Consciousness has been playing the game of separation for a very long time, and the awakening happens at its own pace. Some people are ready for immediate recognition. Others need years or decades of preparation. Neither is better or worse. Both are consciousness exploring different approaches to remembering itself. Most importantly, remember that awakening is not an achievement or attainment. It's not something to be proud of or to use as a way of feeling superior to others. It's simply consciousness recognizing what it has always been. The most authentic expression of this recognition is profound humility combined with boundless love. Humility because there's no separate person to take credit. Love because separation is revealed as illusion. For the next 30 days, experiment with living as the awareness that you are rather than the person you think you are. Notice how this recognition affects your relationships, your work, your responses to challenges, your moments of joy and difficulty. Share your discoveries, not to prove anything, but to add your voice to the conversation consciousness has with itself about its own nature. When you encounter Russell's teachings or similar pointings to truth, remember that they're not information to believe, but invitations to recognize what you already are. The cosmic consciousness Russell described isn't something to achieve, but something to acknowledge as your present reality. Connect with others, but remember that the deepest teaching happens not through words, but through the quality of your presence. Be patient with the integration process. The recognition can happen instantly, but living from it is an ongoing exploration that deepens throughout life. Russell's gift to humanity wasn't just his scientific insights or artistic creations. It was his demonstration that cosmic consciousness is available to anyone willing to look honestly at their own experience. You don't need special abilities, lengthy preparation, or perfect circumstances. You simply need to recognize what you've always been. The light of consciousness itself, appearing as the beautiful, temporary, ever-changing forms of human experience. The universe isn't something you're in, it's something you are. Creation isn't something that happened, it's something you're doing. Consciousness isn't something you have, it's what you are. In recognizing this, you join the awakening of humanity to its true nature as the infinite awareness that appears as all things while remaining forever free, forever whole, forever creative in its expression of limitless love. This is the light of creation, not a distant divine force, but your own essential nature, recognizing itself as the source